knows, right? Anybody wants to stand against a lentil and get themselves indentured for the next 7 years at least, until the next year of Jubilee? All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we've been studying Maccabees for a little while, and I hope that you realize why I bring these studies every year. So year after year, we study the story of Maccabees. Sometimes they make it a little bit more spiritual, a little bit more applicational to kind of our spiritual life. Other years, I go a little bit more historical on you. This is probably a year where I go a bit more historical on you because I realize how much of that ancient history people just do not know because it's not something that is always studied. I mean, how many of you have read through the books of Maccabees? Honestly, you read through the book of Maccabees, that's awesome. So if you read the book of Maccabees and your memory does not betray you, then you remember a lot of these stories that I tell you. I have two main sources when we study these ancient events in this ancient day. The two main sources that I always have for that particular era is the book of the Maccabees, which tells you about all the wars and all the conquests and all of the maneuvering that happened. And the other one is Josephus. Josephus is absolutely instrumental in helping us study that era, that time. So looking at his writing, it's fascinating because I believe actually Josephus is maybe even from the Maccabean line himself. I believe his genealogy somehow is touching on some of the Maccabee Hasmonean families. So this is kind of cool because he knows it very well. This is, you could say, it's his own family history. So he's very upfront about it as he describes all the different things happen. Another one is the sources of the Talmud. Of course, the rabbinic literature does preserve some stories about early Maccabean times, and it tells us about these things. So we've been on this topic, the conflict of darkness and light, and I told you from the beginning that the story of Hanukkah is a story that keeps replaying within our lives over and over and over, all throughout our entire lives, in fact, throughout the entire human history. And it is for us personally, replaced for us this way personally, and replaced for us nationally that way, because there's always an opportunity to do something wonderful and great, and there's always an opportunity to take that wonderful and great something and really mess it up and turn it into something awful. And sadly to say, this is what happened with the story of Hanukkah. As we begin with this wondrous liberation of the Maccabees, the story of freedom and restoration and rededication of the temple, as the generations go on further and further away from those original heroes, further and further away from Mattatyahu, we get into a story and a history that gets darker and darker. And it's not always fun to talk about it, but this is reality. This is what actually happened, and this is what brought us to where we are today. I was earlier talking with James, and I was telling him, I said, do you realize that the Pharisees, that as we know them, wouldn't probably exist in that shape or form, if not the Maccabees, and the Sadducees, as we know them, probably wouldn't be there, and there would be no Essenes, and all these different movements that we've been studying. They all come as a result of this history that you and I have been jumping into. And so this conflict of darkness and light is always with us. And so the Maccabees are just an example story throughout history of how it gets played out. So a quick review. So the Maccabee revolt began with Mattatyahu, right? With his zeal for Torah and Jewish ancestral worship. Yet once the temple service was restored, especially after Judas died. So remember, they bring the temple back, they rededicate, they cleanse everything, pagan influence is gone. Then Judah, the Maccabee, is dead, and his brother takes over. The wars against the Seleucids, they took on a character of a much broader struggle for independence. It's no longer just about cleansing the temple. It's no longer just about ability to worship God of Israel unencumbered by these pagans who are making us do things that we're not supposed to do. Now, as we move on through this history, from Jonathan to Simon, the Maccabee, the struggle shifts from liberty of Jewish practice to political independence and regional dominance, because the brothers take up weapons of war and they start conquering neighboring people. What are they trying to do? They're trying to create buffer zones, security zones, call them whatever you or call them, The idea is that they're trying to create a bigger kingdom with some buffer zones, and they're trying to create safety for themselves so that the kinds of things that have happened to them before, as far as the foreign oppression, will not happen. Because eventually those little foreign kingdoms will rise up and make trouble for Israel. So they're just kind of trying to expand Israel. So Simon's reign ends eventually. So we have the brothers, we have the Maccabee brothers, we have Judah, we have Jonathan, we have Simon. Simon's reign ends with a very treacherous assassination, and it happens in a very tragic way by the hand of his own son-in-law. It's the family. When I talk about family relationships and I talk about how complicated they are and how much difficult they can be, it is probably one of the hardest things, because we want to trust our family, but sometimes this happens. So it's the son-in-law that actually rises up to try to take Simon's power away from him. Whatever Simon had, he wanted. So let me advance my slides here. So here's a story. This is the way the Maccabees describes this story. First book of Maccabees, chapter 16. This is the death of Simon. Now Ptolemy, son of Abuus, has been appointed governor over the plain of Jericho. So you know where Jericho is, by the Dead Sea, in that area. So he has this whole region that he reigns. He had a large store of silver and gold, for he was the son-in-law of a high priest. So this is who is the high priest? Simon is the high priest, one of the Maccabee sons. He says his heart was lifted up, and he determined to get control of the country. And he made treacherous plans against Simon and his sons to do away with them. Now Simon was visiting the towns of the country and attending to their needs. So, as a governor, as a person who rules, he has to survey his kingdom. So he is visiting his son-in-law. You'd think he'll be safe there. The son of Abuus received them treacherously in a little stronghold called Dok, which he had built. He'd given them a great banquet, but he had men there. When Simon and his sons were drunk, Ptolemy and his men rose up, took their weapons, rushed against Simon in the banqueting hall, and killed him and his 2 sons, as well as some of his servants. So he committed an act of great treachery and returned evil for good. Now, this is Jason of Alexandria is supposed to be the author of the book of Maccabees. Obviously, that little ad-lib is his. Ad-lib, he's saying, look, the son-in-law was rich, he was wealthy, had everything he needed. He was a governor of the whole region of Jericho. It's like he could just live on. No, he wanted all of Israel. So he decided to assassinate his father-in-law and his sons and take over the whole entire kingdom. Now, all the good that he had, as far as the power that he had, came to him from his father-in-law. He allowed him to have it, yet he repaid that good with evil. And that treachery is what actually characterizes that entire period. I want you to realize, these are all Jews. These are people from big families, priestly families, and the kind of way in which they treat each other is not very Jewish-like. This is not what Torah teaches us, obviously. So treachery, sin, darkness, it continues to live in the hearts of men, even when they try to bring light. So that is the end. That is the story of the end of Simon. This is a very tragic end to his kingdom. He is the last of the Maccabee brothers, remember, who carried on the revolt and liberated Israel from the oppression of the Seleucid kingdom. Now, one of Simon's sons, John Hyrcanus, he survived. He survived this takeover attempt, and he was able to hold on to his father's power. John Hyrcanus, well, he actually expanded his power in Judea very aggressively. He expanded his power through Idumea and Samaria and parts of what we know as Transjordan in the past, the kingdom of Jordan today. And he made that his kingdom. John Hyrcanus destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. Now, this is important. Why is this an important piece of history? Because remember the relationship between Samaritans and Jews. It was never the same since the days of John Hyrcanus. Remember, this is a person who is a descendant of a priest who now has the power of a king who comes and destroys the Samaritan temple. They could have been left alone to worship on Mount Gerizim as they have before since the days of Persians, but no, he came and destroyed them. He says he forced the Idumeans also to convert to Judaism. That was a very controversial decision that he did, and that decision carried some very long-term implications. People do not realize, but forced conversions, this is how far back they go. Now, Jews did not come up with this. I want you to realize. But the fact is that Jews copied the idea of forcing conversions on other people. That is the sad part of a history that we have to deal with. And when we act contrary to Torah, when we bring our own darkness into the light, it has consequences. And this decision that destroying the Samaritan temple and also converting Edomites by force, essentially, to Judaism, will have implications. You see, there's nothing wrong with allowing people to become Jewish. If people want to convert because that's what they want to embrace, it's a whole another matter to force them, under the sword, so to say, to become Jews. And that's what happened with John Hyrcanus. So, a sad part of history. Let's see. Taking over there. I don't know what's going on with this battery. It's not going for me. I don't know. There you go. All right. So here's a little bit about Hyrcanus for you. This is what he did. This is the way Josephus in Antiquities describes it. Hyrcanus heard of the death of Antiochus. This is not Antiochus IV. This is different Antiochus. But he's presently made an expedition against the cities of Syria, hoping to find them destitute of fighting men, and of such as were able to defend them. However, it was not till the 6th month that he took Medaba, that was not without the greatest distress to his army. So what's going on here? Hyrcanus is taking opportunity of the void of leadership and power, and he is now conquering surrounding countries, including Syria. Remember, Syrians are the reason why we have Hanukkah. They're the ones who came down and tried to conquer Israel and did all these things. They're the ones who did the desecrating of the temple. So now he turns it around on them and says, I'm going to conquer some of their cities. So it's no longer just about defending ourselves. Now, Hyrcanus wants to take over the kingdom, and he thinks that he's going to have an easy prey, and no, they actually fight back. So it's a great distress to his army, it says. But he just still takes those cities. So after this, he took Samega, he took neighboring places, and besides these, Shechem and Gerizim, and the nation of Kuthians who dwelt at the temple, which resembled the temple which was in Jerusalem. So Kuthians are the Samaritans. Remember, this is how Josephus describes the Samaritans. He says that these were people from Cutha. I'm sorry. These people came from Babylon. They came from the city of Cutha in Babylon. They were transported. They were planted there by the Persians to basically create an enclave of friendly people within the land of Israel. And that's how he describes the Samaritans. So now he says that these Kuthians that have been living there all this time since the days of Persian, he comes in, he takes over Shechem, which of course is an ancestral town of the Jews. Remember the story of Joseph and Jacob takes in Shechem. Shechem is their family town. So he takes Shechem back, he takes Gerizim back, he destroys the temple of the Samaritans. Then he continues, says Hyrcanus took also Dora and Marisa, the cities of Idumea, and subdued all the Idumeans and permitted them to stay in that country if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of the Jews. Now, realize English kind of says it funny. In Greek it's a little bit different, but it's close enough. It basically says, you become Jews, you can stay. If not, go find another home because this is my country now. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers that they submitted. And Josephus says, they were hereafter no other than Jews. So that's how the Idumeans stopped being Idumeans. They were basically forcefully converted by John Hyrcanus. Says, you get circumcised, you adopt our laws as your country's laws, and you submit yourself to our judicial authority, and now you're subjects and under our government, and everything you do is what we do, and that's how you follow and that's how you live. If you like that, you can stay. If not, find another place to live. And so they said, we will become Jews. They stayed. That's the way Josephus tells the story. Now, if you see anything wrong with this, this is what's going on. This is not how it has been. This is not the faith of Abraham Avinu, right? Abraham does not go out to the Canaanites and says, circumcise or die. You become one of me. This land is given to me. I'm just going to take it over by force. That's not how it is. He's waiting for the promise to be realized, right? He has to wait for a long time. So this is a big difference in how the Hasmonean family behave as they have some ability and some control and some power. They start subjugating people that are living right next to them. Right or wrong, argue, but this is a part of history of what's happened. And history, well, it tends to have consequences. So that's where we are. Now, John's military expansion of his territories really began to mirror what I call the surrounding Hellenistic kingdoms. All the kingdoms in the world at that time were Hellenistic kingdoms, and he behaved just like they did. Just like all the surrounding kings in all the countries nearby, that's what John did. The priesthood is now a hereditary right of the Hasmonean line. He replaced the Zadokite family, and basically they've been the priestly line there since the days of David. Now they're gone. Now the Hasmoneans are going to be the high priests, and it's going to pass on from their son from their father to the son, and on and on. So they have really changed something major over here in Judaism. And so for the sons of the Hasmoneans, this is a strange thing for us to watch in the pages of history, because these are the people who revolted against the Greek culture, but now they began adopting the very ways they once opposed. Remember, what did Antiochus do? He came and he forced them to abandon their family's ways. And he says, become like us. He wanted to Hellenize them. Now they're doing the same thing, only they're Judaizing the Hellenists, essentially. See, this is a problem. This is a major moral shift. The things that they themselves hated, they have become. John Hyrcanus, he enjoyed a long and largely stabilizing rule over Israel. So the years in which he ruled is from year 134 BCE to the year 104. And I know it doesn't seem long if that doesn't seem long to you, I want you to realize for a king in that part of the world, that's pretty long. Because how do you think most kings died? Usually they got assassinated by somebody who wanted their power. They got poisoned or killed, or just like Simon, he got called to a banquet and a bunch of guys jumped out and sword and assassinated him right there in his own son-in-law's house. So he had this long, fairly stable reign. A lot of it has to do with all the conquering that he did. He wiped out a lot of his own enemies. And then his leadership passed to his son, to Aristobulus I. Now Hyrcanus, remember who Hyrcanus is. John Hyrcanus is the son of Simon. He's the only one that survived that night, so to say, that banquet, okay? He was very powerful, and he never took the title king for himself. He officially remained the high priest, and he was called a ruler, but not a king. Now, Aristobulus did something different. Aristobulus the first, he's the grandson of Mattathias now. He's the grandson of the Maccabee family. He broke with that restraint. He actually took on the title king. Josephus states very explicitly about Aristobulus I. He says he was the first to put a diadem about his head and was called king. So that's what he records in Antiquities. He knows the history. And Aristobulus' reign was very brief, lasted only 1 year, but it was a very violent and very ominous year in Jewish history. I would tell you honestly, even in a short time, people with power can do some serious damage. So 1 year is all he had. Let me tell you about the things that he brought about. Josephus tells us that Aristobulus I imprisoned his own mother. He was allowed by Hyrcanus to rule a small territory of her own. She was given a little area to govern, and yet he didn't trust her, so he put her in prison. And he basically starved her to death. He didn't kill her, but he just wouldn't let her eat. And that was it. So he also imprisoned his own two brothers and executed one of them on suspicion of betrayal. He basically was afraid that they were going to try to take the kingdom from him. So the only way to keep himself safe in power is to put all contenders to the throne into jail. That's exactly what he did. He was protecting his power. Aristobulus I, the one who proclaimed himself to be king, the first of the Maccabee family to be called the king, he was called Philihellene, a lover of Greek culture. Why he was called that is because that's how he ruled. He basically behaved just like all the Hellenistic kings around. He was not behaving in the very Jewish way. The ethics of his fathers were gone. Just like Antiochus IV, he demanded the Jews embrace the Greek ways. Now Aristobulus forced Itureans of Galilee to be circumcised as well. If you think the Idumeans is one isolated case, you can read Antiquities chapter 13, paragraph 318, and it will tell you right there that there were also a group of people living in Galilee called the Itureans, who also migrated there a while ago. He also came upon them and says basically circumcised, become Jews, or else. And so this was Aristobulus I. Again, the family, sort of say, history continues. So I told you he ruled only for 1 year. His rule ended very, very suddenly. He died from sickness. We don't know what happened. Maybe he ate something bad. Back in those days, that happened a lot. People ate something strange, and they didn't have the kind of drugs that we have, so they just died. And that's probably what happened to the king. First king of the Maccabees. That was his very, very violent reign for a year. Let's see. Why am I not advancing today's? Doesn't want to work. Come on. All right. So, Aristobulus I died, and the power passed from Aristobulus to his widows, Salome. She was known as Queen Salome Alexandra. And she basically decided to maintain her power in a very interesting way. She married Alexander Jannaeus, who was the brother of Aristobulus. This is another grandson of Simon. So this is the guy who was imprisoned, but didn't get executed. So she married him, his brother. Not entirely an unbiblical thing, right? We kind of have that in the Torah. But there's a reason why. They're trying to keep it all in the family. And as essentially Alexander Jannaeus now is out of prison, he's married, he assumes the power, he assumes both the high priesthood and the kingship. Because why? Because that's now being passed on to him. Because remember, his predecessor proclaimed himself king. So he just continues on in his footsteps. Now, Josephus portrays Alexander Jannaeus as one of the most polarizing rulers in Jewish history. You'd be surprised. Sometimes people think they would be worse people, but he's pretty much up there. Military, he was extremely ambitious. And personally, on a personal level, he was absolutely ruthless. And he expanded the Hasmonean territory even further, to the greatest extent of all the Hasmonean kings. And he conquered coastal territories. He went and conquered Gaza, for example. That was him. He took it all. All was known, the land of the Philistines. Ashkelon, Gaza, he took over all those lands. He went up as far north as Tyrian territory, what we know today as Lebanon, right? He took over those lands as well. He took the rest of the Transjordan that his predecessor did not conquer, and the rest of Idumea and Samaria, whatever pockets that were remaining in Samaria, he took them over, and he ruled all of them from year 103 to the year 76 BCE. So again, he's got a pretty decent long rule. But how is he doing it? By conquering all of these people and by taking out all of his enemies before they have a chance to take him out. Now, there's a reason why I say that his reign was very ruthless. And of course, Salome, she plays a big role in this period of history. She's a fascinating character. But there's a reason why his reign was very ruthless that I have to tell you about. And again, this is part of the past that we're not proud about, but we study this history to help us understand. Help us understand how we got to where we are. Under Alexander Jannaeus, two ideological groups emerged in Jewish society. The Sadducees, the aristocratic nobles, priestly elites, who were aligned with the ambitions of the Hasmonean rulers. Obviously, they had a lot in common. So that's one group. And the other one was the Pharisees. They were popular lay teachers of Torah, loyal to ancestral traditions, and they were very suspicious of the Hasmonean power. They did not like how much the Hasmoneans have drifted into the Greek world. Being of a priestly heritage, they seemed to neglect the traditions of the people that have been with Jewish people for so long. So there's this opposing group that rises up, the Pharisees. You could see how the rulers, the Hasmoneans, how they would be okay with the Sadducees, but they would have a little bit of a problem with the Pharisees because there was some pushback. The Pharisees wanted for people to continue to follow the traditions that have been there since the temple was restored by Zerubbabel, since Ezra, since Nehemiah. We have a long history, and there's so many traditions that were established in that period of time, and they said we need to hold on to them. They make us who we are. We can't become all Greeks, essentially. So there was a bit of a conflict that was brewing up between these two splits that were starting to appear in the society. And something happened that Alexander Jannaeus made a whole lot worse through his actions. During the Feast of Tabernacles, this is the celebration of Sukkot, while he was officiating as the high priest, he's officiating the sacrifice, Jannaeus performed the water libation ritual deliberately, contrary to the tradition which was embraced by the majority of Jews and by the Pharisees. So if you remember the story of how the water libation ceremony would happen, in those days people would go and they would take a pitcher, and the procession of the priests would go all the way down to the pool of Siloam. They would go from the top of the mountain, right, where the temple is, all the way through the streets of the city. They would make it through the water gate and go through and get spring water from Siloam. Then they would take that spring water, and with the procession back, they would make it with torches, with lights. People would dance and sing, and they would come and bring that water, and they would pour it on the altar. And the reason why they would perform this pouring ceremony on the altar is because they were asking for God to send rain. Now, is that ceremony in the Torah? No, it's not. If you read the book of Leviticus, there is no water pouring ceremony in Leviticus, right? So it's not there. So what they were doing is a tradition. This is a tradition that started a long time ago. And they were simply taking the water and making this great celebration, pouring it out, praying for rain. Now, we pray for rain during Sukkot anyway, since those days. The tradition of praying for rain and asking for God to send the rainy season, because right after Sukkot it starts raining, right? That's where it comes back to. And so the people would perform this water ceremony, and they would take willow branches and they would hit the altar also with willow branches. These are all traditions. These are all customs. They're not in the book of Leviticus. Like, yes, the branches are there, but it doesn't tell you what to do with the branches except shake them. Well, their tradition was to hit the altar with the branches, okay? And so during the ceremony, as he's performing it, he deliberately makes it different from the way people expected him to make. Everybody was expecting him to officiate this way. He does something completely different, and the crowd goes wild, And all the people who were there, they were aligned with Pharisees. They literally took up their etrogs and started throwing it at him. And they pelted him with etrogs. Now I want you to realize he is the high priest. That's very disrespectful. But what you also don't realize, he's not just the high priest. He's the commander of the armies. So what do you think happens when the high priest has the power of the military? I'll tell you how the rest of the story goes when my slide changes. I don't know why it's not working today for us. There you go. Alexander Jannaeus' response was absolutely brutal. He ordered his foreign mercenaries, but this time he had so much money he was hiring soldiers from all over the place, to attack the worshippers right there in the temple, killing thousands of people. They pelted him with etrogs, and he called the military on them and slaughtered them right there in the holy place. The temple stopped being a sacred space that was shared by everyone and became a battleground for sectarian power. Because now what was the fight was between the Pharisaic ways and the Sadduceic ways, with the popular tradition and the way of the elites. So this king priest defended his Sadducean position, not with Torah, not with arguments, not with reason, but with brute military force. And the conflict escalated into a full-scale civil war that basically lasted for several years, with the Pharisees even becoming so desperate that they appealed to the Seleucid king for help. Maybe he can set him straight, because at least here's another king that can talk sense into him. He's killing his own people. So they appealed to the Seleucid king. The Seleucid king was no help, but at least that's what Josephus tells us. And the war lasted for years. Alexander Jannaeus, eventually he prevailed, yet his victory was marked by extreme cruelty. In one of the most chilling episodes in the Second Temple history, Josephus recounts that Jannaeus crucified about 800 Pharisees who fought against him in Jerusalem. As they hung in pain, he ordered their wives and children slaughtered in front of them as they watched while he feasted in the palace. I don't know if this story is true or exaggerated, but it is still deeply traumatized Jewish memory of the Hasmonean rule. I don't know if it truly happened that way, but that's the way Josephus tells the story. He took 800 Pharisees, crucified them all over the city, and then slaughtered their families in front of them. This is a brutality that has not been seen in Israel. So, and this is supposed to be the grandson of Mattathias. Do you see? We're only a couple generations away from a righteous priesthood doing these kinds of things. He controls everything, and he controls the military. And that's the reign of terror that he brings upon. So the way the Pharisees are, the reason they are the way they are, is partially because of the way he was. And the reason why the Sadducees and Pharisees had the conflict, now perhaps you can start to understand what was behind that conflict. It was not just mere theological arguments where you're right and I'm wrong. This is life and death. This is the direction of the way the people are going to live their lives in worship. That's what was at stake, and that's why people argued and fought. That's why tensions got really high. So this is a very, very painful part of history that I want you to realize. People don't understand that crucifixions is something that happened in Jerusalem way before Romans. People think crucifixion is a Christian thing or a Roman thing. No, the Maccabees did it. Oh, Romans did it too. Don't get me wrong. Do you know who they learned it from? They learned it from them. Romans did the same thing. The roads around Rome were lined with crosses of revolutionaries and insurrectionists upon which they hung. So Jews said, that's not a bad idea. We'll do the same thing. So that's what he did. Alexander Jannaeus. That's why I told you he is one of these really rulers that is portrayed in the most contrasting way in Jewish writings. So by the end of his reign, Alexander Jannaeus basically vastly expanded his kingdom, his wealth, and unfortunately what happened is he shattered the communal unity. There's no unity among Jews anymore. It's all about groups and sections now. Josephus remarks that he ruled by fear and was hated by his own people. That's the way it was. On his deathbed, Jannaeus reportedly advised his wife, Salome, to reconcile with the Pharisees, recognizing, obviously too late, that stability required moral legitimacy, not merely force. He knew that the kingdom will not continue this way, that if he was going to have Israel continue, it will have to be some sort of a moral force behind it. So the rule of Aristobulus the first, his predecessor only 1 year, and Alexander Jannaeus shows how much the Hasmonean dynasty shifted in the direction of the tyrannical Hellenistic style monarchy. A very darkness that their ancestors fought is what they became. So the royal privilege replaced the covenant. That's what I want you to realize. Coercion replaced persuasion. Violence among brothers replaced unity and previous joint opposition to pagan ways. Israel was fractured and weak. People were not united. That's what happened. And so in comes Salome. That's her opportunity to restore things. I wanted to bring this short little aside, this little meditation for you, to remind you that history tends to repeat itself. It tends to reverberate. In a way, the story of a very promising beginning by the Maccabees and their prideful drift away from God's ways is very similar to other stories in the Bible. I want to remind you the story of King Saul, who in 1 Samuel chapter 9 through 15, we read about these events that he exhibited a very similar drift. He began in a very good, positive way. That's not the way he ended. Instead of waiting for Samuel, he made an unlawful sacrifice, as if he himself was a priest. What did he do? He tried to consolidate power. Even a little bit, taking the power of the priesthood for himself, even for a short time. Now he is a priest and a king. All of a sudden, that's a very dangerous road. And what does happen? Tragedy happens. He does not end well. Solomon, in 1 Kings, you can read first 11 chapters, his own struggles of doing what is right. He also drifted away from God. That is not new. We know these stories. King Uzziah, in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, he did many wonderful things. He began as a king from a very, very young age. Essentially, he did so many right things, but he became proud, and he was struck with leprosy for going into the temple and attempting to burn incense as if he was a priest. Remember, the priestly role was given only to a particular family. He wanted to take that for himself, so he goes in, he decides burning incense. They kick him out of there, and the Lord curses him with leprosy. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we should have known better. This is a history that tends to reverberate over and over. Maccabees should have known that these kinds of things can happen if they try to take power that's not theirs. And that is what we ended up. So Salome, or she was called Shlom Tzion in Hebrew, she did something that no Hasmonean ruler has ever done before her. She ruled by using consensus, not coercion. She released the imprisoned Pharisees and restored their influences in all legal and religious matters, allowing them to shape the national Jewish life of Israel. Josephus wrote this: she permitted Pharisees to do everything according to their pleasure, and she laid the government almost entirely upon them. It's a big reversal. Now, was the dying words of her husband influenced her, or maybe she saw this herself all along? But this is a big turnaround that she did. Now, obviously she remained the queen, but she allowed the Pharisees to reign with their consensus. They made the laws, they made the rules. So the decade from 76 to 67 BCE was one of the most peaceful periods of the Hasmonean rule. The entire time that the Maccabean family actually ruled, the Talmud records this. In the days of Shimon ben Shetach and Queen Shlomzion, the rains fell on the eve of Sabbath, and wheat grew large as kidneys. Now, idiomatic language that it is, the rabbis like to talk that way. What they're really trying to say, Hashem blessed those years with abundance of crop and peace. Rain on the end of Sabbath is just the perfect time. That's when we need it. Why? Because we're not busy doing anything else and might as well get all soaking wet. Because we can rest and just relax. Salome brought that about. She appointed her elder son, Hyrcanus II, who was not violent-tempered, but more of a humble personality. She appointed him as the high priest, and he aligned very well with Pharisaic values. So that was the new high priest. But Hyrcanus' brother, Aristobulus II, he was backed by the Sadducees and by the military elites. Josephus wrote, Aristobulus secretly gathered forces intending to seize the government. When Salome died in 67 BCE, a new civil war broke out. Now you might have seen that coming. She didn't. Because that's one thing Salome failed to do. She did not protect the vulnerable son that she had and his power. By allowing Aristobulus to build up his support, his army, and eventually he started another war. Now it's the war between brothers. Now, another person of note that you need to know about in this history, and I'm kind of segueing you towards the next topic. Another person is Antipas, a son of an Edomite nobleman in Jerusalem's court, who was forcefully converted by John Hyrcanus. Remember I told you there are consequences to these things? Well, his son was named Antipater. He became an influence on John Hyrcanus II. John Hyrcanus II is the one who is now fighting his brother Aristobulus for power. They're having a civil war. And as he rose to prominence, as the brothers basically fought for power, both brothers appealed to Romans for help. And Romans heard them. But instead of helping them, Romans helped themselves. They realized the weakness. So in the year 63 BCE, General Pompey took advantage of this infighting in Israel. The two brothers are having civil war, both asking for help. We need backup. We need backup. Romans, come and back me. Back me. They just marched into Israel. Pompey conquered Jerusalem, and he stripped Hyrcanus II of his royal power, making Israel his client kingdom. Now, Josephus tells us that he actually marched into the very holy place. Pompey himself walked right in. He didn't rob it. He didn't destroy it. He didn't burn it. He didn't take a thing. But he declared the dominance of Rome by walking into the very, very holiest place within Israel, the one place that he was not allowed to go. He walked right in there. So he stripped Hyrcanus II of his power. He's no longer a king. Now Israel is a client kingdom, just like many other kingdoms that Romans have conquered. And this was the end of the Maccabean independence. Remember, what began as a short period in history where Jews actually had autonomy and self-governance, where no other foreign power stood over them and told them what to do. They had a good opportunity to restore the kingdom the way it was meant to be in the Torah. But now it's over. And eventually, the rule of Jerusalem passed to Herod, who was Antipater's son. So now you know the whole story. From Antipas to Antipater to Herod, who now becomes known as Herod the Great. Also a very brutal person, an Idumean. So this is the history. Remember, it was Antipas who was converted. Antipater already grew up as a Jew. And then Herod, obviously second generation Jew. And then he's the one who becomes the king that Romans preferred. That brings us into the 1st century BCE history-wise. And now you understand how the conflict of darkness and light has played out from the very beginning of the Maccabean story and into the first century as well. Because guess what? These conflicts of power continue. If you read the gospel stories, you see the same struggle for power that we read on the pages of Antiquities, that we read on the pages of Talmud, that we read, whether we read Maccabees, it doesn't really matter. It's the same struggle that happens. So if you want to understand the history of the first century, you kind of have to go back sometimes a couple centuries to understand how come Pharisees were Pharisees? Why were they so just so? What was the Sadducees? What was their point for power? What did they want? That's what these stories are all about. So fascinating characters, very interesting people. Hopefully, as we segue into this next topic, because I told you I was going to finish my stories about Pharisees. This is the beginning of the stories of Pharisees. This is how Pharisees came to be. So as I teach the next lessons after we come back from our little break, I will jump right into the stories of Pharisees. We'll wrap up the first century BCE and the emergence of these groups. So questions, thoughts, ideas, reflections, ladies and gentlemen. We have a few minutes. We can discuss these things. Yes?
You mentioned Solomon, and I was curious to understand that, is it accurate to say that Solomon, during his reign, that he added 11 menorahs in the temple?
There were multiple menorahs in the temple, yes. Because his temple was much bigger. So the tradition says. Okay, I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't bring you a picture home. But so the tradition says that he did add menorahs. Now, why? Because now the temple is much bigger. What was designed as a tent in the wilderness was really a simple thing. Once it became a temple, it became much more bigger, much more elaborate. And Herod added all sorts of things to the temple as well. The temple building itself was multi-storied with upper chambers and side storerooms. And there was even windows and openings into the top, all the way from the roof and things like that. There were things that were part of the Herod's temple that were much more elaborate. And yes, so there were things that were added quite a bit. The altar was enlarged. Everything was made larger. There was a lot of transformation. A lot of times people look at the Torah, they just read Leviticus and they think, okay, they read Exodus and they think this is it. Like, no, it all blew up and all became huge. It became enlarged in every way possible.
We can all wish they read Leviticus.
We can all wish they read Leviticus. Yes. That people don't read Leviticus, but yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. Questions, thoughts, ideas, reflections. What do you guys think? Interesting part of history. Have you heard this stuff before?
No.
This is all new for you? All right. Awesome. So I'm glad I told you the story the way I did then, because now it's going to stick in your mind. Now you can get a picture of John Hyrcanus from your mind too. You know? Jews with big swords. That doesn't happen very often.
When you had the Hasmoneans, the hammer, was there also a sickle involved too?
No, the sickle belonged to the farmers. They were the proletariat that were supposed to be bringing stuff to the ruling elites. This story repeats itself. I mean, you could see why I talk about this story of darkness and light. I mean, we all have a capacity for good, but we also have a capacity for darkness, which we carry within us. And given the chance of the corruption that we encounter, we can turn things in very dark places. And this is a story that we keep learning from. Like I said, there are biblical precedents, biblical examples we can look at. People are turning away from the Lord, whether it be Solomon. Solomon's a good example. Just think about all the wealth that he had. What was Solomon's problem? He was too darn rich. He had so much money. And he made all these alliances. He made all these peace. He married all these ladies so that nobody could now attack him. Solomon had a brilliant policy. These people don't like me. Let me marry their daughter. So then now they can't attack me because I'm their relative. You know, they don't want their daughter to suffer. So, like, but that brought degradation of Israel completely. It absolutely destroyed his family, and we understand what happened to his line, right? We read the stories. It fractured the kingdom. The United Kingdom became the divided kingdom. Now we have the north, now we have the south. Now we have the 10 tribes breaking off into idolatry. This is the drama of Jewish people divided. Maccabees, further division. So when I pray for unity, I'm being very serious when I do that. I'm praying for unity for our people today, because we are not learning those lessons. When we're divided, we fall every single time. So anyway, I'm glad these stories are new for you, and now you know what to look forward to. So thank you for your attention. If there's no more questions, awesome.